Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at the locally based, independently owned bookstore, Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair, it's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual evening with Julia May Jonas to discuss her remarkable debut novel, Vladimir, published by our friends at Avid Reader Press. Julia May Jonas is a playwright and teaches theater at Skidmore College. She holds an MFA in playwriting from Columbia University, and Vladimir is her debut novel. Maria Semple says Vladimir is brainy and sexy. Lily King says Vladimir is a thrilling debut, smart, sharp, and uber provocative. Publishers Weekly says it's mordantly funny, and Booklist says it's deeply engrossing. We think it's the bomb, and it has one of the coolest covers ever. To moderate this evening's conversation, we're joined by Claire Dederer, the author of the New York Times best-selling memoir, Poser, My Life in 23 Yoga Poses, which Elizabeth Gilbert called the book we all need. A book critic, essayist, and reporter, Dederer is a longtime contributor to the New York Times and has also written for The Atlantic, Vogue, Slate, The Nation, and New York Magazine, among other publications. Just a quick reminder that throughout this evening's broadcast, you can post questions below in the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen. And please order your copy of Vladimir from Books and Books and support independent bookstores. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage. Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Hi there. Thank you for having us. Julia, congratulations. The book is incredible. Thanks to Books and Books for having us both. And I'm just so thrilled and honored to be with you on your launch date and be part of the life of this book, which I just love. So I'm going to kick it over to you right away and just let you start off by giving us a reading.
Okay. Thank you so much. And thank you for having this conversation, Claire. I'm so excited. So I am going to start with a very short scene that takes place fairly early on in the novel when the narrator is recalling some fallout from this investigation that is happening with her husband in regards to his past inappropriate relationships with students. And I'll just launch into it in medias res. However, when the wave of accusations and the petition came, I found that suddenly everyone knew I was the wife of the disgraced chair. Toward the end of the spring semester, I was sitting in my office when a group of 5 young women from my adaptations class entered, giggling with what was clearly their own sense of self-importance and buoyed up enthusiasm they had roused in whatever cabal they'd had before. I invited them in, and they exchanged daring glances until Casey, clad in a flowered baby doll and lace stockings with a Japanime hairstyle, 2 buns, one on each side of her head, a girl who would attach a pen cap to the fat bottom part of her lip during class and accidentally pull her shirt down so that one nipple was exposed, a girl who always laughed too loudly at anything the one very handsome boy said in class, stepped forward. "We wanted to talk to you, she said. "Okay," I said. They were already annoying me. They were an annoying bunch. Individually, I'm able to drum up most of the time a sense of patience and tolerance for each student, even the extremely grating ones. I don't know what happens in one's youth to make one student so tolerable, so pleasant, so secure in themselves, so eager to learn, and what makes other students so irritating. But I pride myself on not discriminating against them because of it. With most of my students, I'm able to understand their need to be seen, and I'm able to focus on that need and let their tics and blips, their entitlements, their insecurities or overconfidences simply wash past. I'm able to see them in progress and to know them in progress, to know that they don't yet fully grasp what they are presenting to the world as they present it. But even if irritating students can be withstood individually and pleasant students can be excellent company, students in groups are always awful. They get too much bravery from each other. They forget to behave well. The interaction with this group led by Manic Pixie Casey was bound to be painful. Well, we just wanted to say, Becca, a tall girl who took her emotions as seriously as cancer, wearing a baggy turtleneck over a baggy dress over baggy pants. Joke, how do you get into a hippie's pants? Take off her skirt first. Stepped up. Well, we just wanted to say, like, you don't have to, like, do the whole supportive silent wife thing. I breathed in, white-hot anger rushing up my foreheads into my elbows. Then Tabitha, in her mechanic's jumpsuit, worn unbuttoned to the waist so that her bra was visible, stepped forward. Like, you're this hot, brilliant lady. We think you're really hot. I could tell they prized their own opinion of my hotness, their ability to appreciate hotness in an older woman. And, like, it is totally unfair what he's done to us. You? I asked. Us women, she said. Ah, I said, not you personally. Casey stepped forward again. We just want to know when you're going to dump his ass. 'Cause you should, someone in the chorus piped up. Careful, 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 I thought to myself. Careful. We professors talked about it all the time. Nowadays, you must be so careful. It's good, we would say to each other. It's good that there's safety. Though we all wondered what we were preparing these students for with all our carefulness, as if the world was going to continue being as careful. But then again, maybe it was, we would say. Maybe if these were the people who were in the world, who were comprising the professional culture, then the world would have no choice except to be more careful. And that would be a good thing. People said this crop of youth was weak, but we knew differently. We knew they were so strong, so much stronger than us, and equipped with better weapons, more effective tactics. They brought us to our knees with their softness, their consistent demand for the consideration of their feelings, the way they could change all we thought would stay the same for the rest of our lives, be it stripping naked for male directors in undergraduate productions of the Bacchae, ignoring racist statements in supposedly great works of literature, or working for less when others were paid more. They had changed all that we hadn't been able to, and our only defense was to call them soft. They had God and their friends and the internet on their side, and perhaps they would make a better world for themselves. Their aim was not to break taboos the way people born 10 to 20 years before me, and in a small way my generation had done. No, they worked in a subtler and stricter way, and perhaps it had to be so. And so careful, I told myself. No anger, no personal attacks, just grace, grace, grace. The girls stood nervously in front of me, waiting for my response. I cultivated warmth in my chest and brought it up to my face. I pushed the warmth through my smile, letting it settle around my eyes. I want to thank you for coming to see me. I'm flattered on 2 accounts, for calling me a hot lady and for the care that you've extended toward me. It makes me feel hopeful for the future to be surrounded by young women who are as passionate and empathetic as you are. Sit down, I urged them, and they crammed onto the couch in its arms, facing me. We all live and work within structures and institutions, I told them. We can't help it. I live inside of institutional sexism, racism, and homo and transphobia, for example. And the difficult thing to understand about these institutions is that we all, however aware of it we are or not, practice sexism, racism, and homo or transphobia, even if we are female, a person of color, or a homosexual or trans person. And so I'm fully willing to admit that my remaining with my husband, not standing by his actions necessarily, but simply remaining in relationship to him, may be a product of my own internalized sexism. Certainly, how could it not be? Right, said Casey, a band of saliva visible in her open mouth. That said, and I say this again with such deep gratitude for the care that you've extended toward me, that my husband and I have had a life together longer than any of you have been alive. And we've had agreements and arrangements and compromises throughout that time, and challenges. We're now faced with another challenge, both a public challenge and a private challenge. I know that you will understand if I beg for your understanding and respect of my privacy as I decide for myself, as a hot, brilliant lady, how I will handle my marriage of 30 years. Extending me that courtesy is an act of feminism in and of itself. 10 minutes later, I closed the door to my office, waving and blowing kisses as they beamed at me. Assholes, I thought. And then she goes on to examine that view. But that's where she's left at that moment.
Incredible passage. I guess let's start with the narrator, because as people have heard from that reading, she's incredibly complicated, breathtakingly complicated. And I wanted to say that when I read this book, the very first line in her voice made me actually gasp. And I don't think I've ever gasped at the first line of a book ever. It says, When I was a child, I loved old men, and I could tell they also loved me. So we're getting at a very almost compulsive kind of truth telling, maybe. And I wanted to ask about her voice and how you came to it and how this character shaped your writing of the book. Did you sort of write her first? And how did it come into shape?
Yeah, I mean, she was a character that I had written in a play in 2018, which was not Vladimir, but it had some themes and ideas that surrounded Vladimir. And so I had written a scene that takes place very early on where she shows a young colleague all of her stuff, which became the first chapter of the novel. But I immediately clicked into that voice, I think, when I was, writing plays is a kind of ventriloquism. You do channel these voices and try to get inside them in their bodies and their speech patterns and their thoughts and their thought structures. And so when I went to write it as prose, it actually helped, I think, starting out to think of it as a very long monologue that I was writing in her voice, and I could embody her in that kind of almost actorly way, taking on the role of her and her thoughts and histories and all of that.
Huh. That's interesting because we'll get to the Lolita aspect of the book later, but that's a really interesting way to think about Humbert as someone giving a long monologue, which I had never thought about before. And that monologuing quality of your narrator, I mean, the book is very plotted. There's a lot of plot in the book, but a lot of what's pulling it forward is just our desire to see what she'll say next. And so the monologue's super effective. The passage you read really gave a sense to listeners about how political this novel is, how it is part of the sexual politics of this moment. And I wanted to know what brought you to want to write about this political moment. Why a novel? And really one of my big questions is, how were you able to find such a funny and playful approach to an issue that is usually invites polemics?
Yeah.
Right? That's a lot of questions.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I was interested in exploring primarily someone whose world has shifted underneath her feet, someone who has gone, and that to me is the most interesting thing, almost maybe about any character, but particularly what I found so engaging about her was thinking about someone in the process of having gone from potentially being on the very right side of history in the way that she feels, to all of a sudden finding herself thrust or because of her because of these views that she has, feeling like all of a sudden she's getting pushed into the wrong side of history, and how destabilizing that feels. And so I think, in a way, the campus politics is a litmus test for exploring that kind of character, because I think to some extent, all of us feel that or will feel that at some point in our lives, going from feeling like we're part of a movement, and then feeling like we're shifted to the side. And so for me, that was the thing that I think allowed me to stay with her and not turn it into activism, because I'm not interested really in that, and I was kind of much more interested in thinking about it as, I'm going to steal my editor's words, as a diagnosis, not a prescription.
Right, which leaves a lot more room to be funny.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was reading the book, I was thinking about the Aziz Ansari I don't know what to call it, scandal, cancellation, whatever. And I'm 55 now, I think. And I think I was about 50 or 51 when that happened. And it was really interesting because it was this perfect fault line where everyone older than me was like, it's a date, what's the problem? And everyone younger than me was up in arms. Not everyone, but for the most part. And there is something about that person who's right on that edge of being in the midst of that change that's really interesting. And so
Yeah.
the way that you get at her as a feminist and the young women as feminists, can you talk a little more about that, about the role of feminism in the book?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of that, I'm conscious, especially, I'm younger than my narrator, but even when I went to school, there were professor-student relationships. It was, it was maybe a little more illicit, but it was sexy and desired in some ways, sometimes, and certainly there were all sorts of circumstances in which it wasn't. But I am conscious that both for my students who I have now, and for women who are older, who are my colleagues, that we just all swam in the waters that we swam in. It's so hard to extricate ourselves from what we grew up with, and with our own personal histories, our own personal views, our own personal way we've thought about our sexuality. I mean, I certainly felt like with the narrator that, for her, obviously, virginity and chastity has been a way to police women forever. And the idea of turning sexuality into something extremely harmful that is extremely damaging and is a way to continue to, for lack of a better word, to oppress women, that is something that for her, that was her project. That was her project.
Right.
She wanted freedom, and so to then feel like I have to reevaluate these relationships as not some sort of exercise of my freedom, but potentially someone taking advantage of me. I think that's where she feels like she can't necessarily accept that, because that's not what her, that would be chipping away at some fundamental beliefs, but also just history about what women were asked to do and asked to be, especially when she was growing up.
Right. Yeah. If we mitigate, historically, when sexual freedoms are mitigated, that's not usually something that works out well for women.
No,
right?
no.
It's not like a good thing for them. Though I think one thing that's so fascinating about this book that I couldn't stop thinking about was, when she's talking about this stuff at the opening, and I love that you read this passage where she's really just so withering about her students and so definitive. She really knows what she thinks. And, I was really interested in what you were doing as a writer. I was feeling authorial presence there. Like, what's the author's relationship to this material? I was, and diagnostic, as you said, rather than prescriptive. I was sort of like, where's the author in this whole story? And then you have this narrator with this really strong perspective, and I don't want to give away anything about the plot, but she does go off the rails. And so does the subsequent revelation of her kind of downward spiral retroactively make us question her point of view? Right? Like, what was your thinking about that? That question's been pulling at my sleeve since I read the book.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting. I mean, I think I was, I think there's so many different factors that are working on her in the action that she takes toward the end, that in a way it's hard to pull the thread. I mean, I think that she can be right about certain things and wrong about certain things, and that maybe all of those things can exist. And in a way, I didn't write it as a play because it needed the amount of words it needed. So sometimes, it's hard to summarize because because it needed all of the complexity. It needed all of her back and forth, because I think the back and forth really is about, someone trying to work something out. And then this other part of herself that is just moving towards action, potentially against her better judgment, potentially because of her beliefs. It feels like they're all working to complicate each other. That was not really an answer to your question, but
I actually sort of wasn't expecting one, and I appreciate that. It's you took the book. It took a book's length of work to express what you had to say about this. It's sometimes hard to sum it up in this kind of moment. I wanted to go back to the idea of playwriting again. A friend who's a novelist said that she felt that your book had your book moves so quickly back and forth, these quick turns that reminded her of a slalom skier, which is actually how your narrator describes the feeling of flow at one point. And I guess sort of all the writers I know have questions for you. And one of them is, how do you approach structure and storytelling? And is that different in playwriting than in novels?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just recently realized that that Vladimir has a very Aristotelian structure, which I actually hadn't realized until after I was finished with all my edits on it. So I certainly think that playwriting and that sense of setting out with an expectation or a question and then working your way to answer that question, I think that is something that is ingrained in me when I think about that. I do think about leaps and spaces. I think playwriting is all about leaps and spaces. And so I think that, I don't know, I don't want to necessarily say helped, but that was something I was conscious of working with, is just that breath when you move on. And then I was conscious of a sense of always having, at the end of each chapter or at the end of each scene, having something shift, so that we were somewhere new. And to me, that feels like, and it didn't have to be a new place, plot wise, but it did have to potentially be a new place emotionally, for her, so that we were not at the same, we were no longer ever at the same place that we started when we had begun the chapter. So I think those are all things that I would teach in playwriting, and when I teach my students to think about. And then I also, certainly thought about and connected to the rhythm of the book, and the book is a rhythmic experience, and how that is just that is something in playwriting that I'm always attempting to connect to, and that I felt like I wanted to feel inside of the book, just this sense that it had its own pulse, and that it was moving forward with a beat in this way.
Yeah, I won't go too far into craft stuff, but I just I know that experience of structuring something in an Aristotelian 3-act structure unconsciously. And I think that this book feels so unexpected at every turn. And I have so many students who are sort of resistant to that form, that like very sturdy 3-act form. And I feel like I can point them toward this book and say, it doesn't have, that's something that can be just as surprising and innovative as other forms, right? So I love that.
Yeah, and I feel like, this is a little bit in the weeds, but in playwriting, there's kind of, sometimes people are like, the Aristotelian structure is a male form, and then there are these other circular forms that are female forms. And I do think I did have some consciousness about thinking, like, this is a woman who is going to adopt this form. This is the form she's going to adopt to tell this story.
Yeah, I love that, because of like the Sarah Ruhl quote about the Aristotelian 3-act structure as the form of the male orgasm.
Yes.
And the way that your narrator is constantly sort of annexing and borrowing male power.
Right.
That's great. That's fantastic. I love that. It's in terms of moving from, well, I'll interrupt myself for a second and remind people that they can ask questions. I think there's a spot where it says ask a question, so feel free to type them in there and I'll look at them shortly. Moving from the theater to the novel, what was it like moving out of a collaborative experience into just you?
It was honestly such a huge relief, just because theater is so hard. It's so hard to get done. It's so fantastic when you're actually doing it. And then all of the stuff around actually getting theater to happen in a space is really, really challenging. Yeah. And it also, I did write this I started writing it in March 2020. So it was the beginning of the pandemic. So theater didn't exist. So it opened, and I had a lot of groundwork, and I have been, a friend said, to me after she read it, she said, "I think this book has been in you for a long time." And I said, "Well, I hope so," because it came out very quickly. But I found that being able to actually just directly transmit what I was intending, and know that that was what the reader was going to get, was really quite liberating, and felt great, because I feel like there's, in a play, there's so many layers of interpretation. There's directorial interpretation, there's actor interpretation. Like, I've seen plays ruined by bad lighting design. So to be able to just say, this is the book, this is the thing I made, and this is the thing that people are going to experience as the actual thing that I made, felt so, thrilling and almost illicit.
Yeah. Well, and then there's the intimacy of the words passing silently into the reader's mind, right? Which is a little bit different. And is that different to find the voice for words that are going to be spoken out loud rather than entering my mind as a reader? Like, is it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you do have, on the page, we're just a lot more patient. So we can visit backstory, and we want more information, so we can visit her, more of her thoughts. We can find little digressions delightful. I've been in downtown theater for so long. You can sit in a play and enjoy it for the first 15 minutes and then go on to hate it because the playwright is just not taking care of you. They're not getting you to that. You don't understand why you're there. Whereas I feel like when you're reading a novel, you can put it down, you can pick it up. You can say, you could start to read it and say, you know what, I'm interested in this, but this is not for me right at this moment, and put it to the side. You can read it angrily, with it. So I feel like there's just an ability to be patient because it's not a durational form that allows you to spread out in a novel.
I really appreciate how your book invites anger. Actually, that's wonderful. I hadn't thought about that before. I wanted to talk about the Lolita issue. The unreliable narrator, Vladimir is the title, and the opening line. Like, there's this way in which Lolita is haunting the book, but not in any kind of I just wanted you to talk about the influence of Lolita.
Sure. I mean, I will say that I think that, or my husband reminded me recently that when I was writing that original play that the character came from, at the time I was reading a biography of Vera Nabokov. And I was, and in a way, the character of this woman was based more on this idea of this academic wife who is, of this academic wife, and which Vera was. And I was very inspired by that. I mean, and I will also say that I took a lot of inspiration from Laughter in the Dark, which is Nabokov's, previous novel, which is also a very, I mean, it's a little bit like Lolita, pre-Lolita. He was very interested in one subject.
Right. He used to do it many times. Yeah,
he enjoyed doing it many times. And I think, I think that I was interested in thinking about flipping that gaze and thinking about ways in which a woman can put her obsession not on herself, but outside of herself, in the way that Humbert Humperdinck is, puts his obsession outside onto this object, or Albinus, I think he's called in Laughter in the Dark.
The same character. Yeah.
So in the way they're able to fixate on something outside of themselves, and then it's also really about them. And I felt like I didn't necessarily know that I had actually ever really seen that inside of a female character in particularly that way, and in particularly the way that she crosses a threshold in the way that those men cross thresholds. And I was interested in someone who, fantasized and then did actually cross a threshold. And so, I think that is running through. And then I think, I lost my train of thought. So, but yeah, he's all over the book. I mean, he's all over the book. There are lots of references and explorations, but I'm a fan too of Nabokov, and I also was interested in his uses of irony and his tricks and games and the little references that he inserts inside of things, and that was also something that I just felt like I just wanted someone to be able to own that, own that kind of voice. That
right, and one that even the collapse of reality a little bit that you bring in. I think that one thing that's really interesting about the book is the way that Vladimir is centered, the way Lolita is centered in that book, where he's there, but he's sort of not there. And the book is really more about her desire than it is about Vladimir himself. And I guess you could talk about, I was wondering if you could talk about like the difference between the narrator's desire and male desire in the book.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's one line which I think is kind of, I feel like is a little bit of the key to it. It happens later on, and she says something about, there's an incident that happens. It's hard to talk about this without too many spoilers, but there's an incident that happens, and then she says, as if any of these men ever cared how they were perceived. And I think for the narrator, she actually does care not only about getting the thing, I mean, I think when she thinks about her husband and his indiscretions, she thinks about him wanting the act, the sex act, and not necessarily caring how the women perceived him at the time. He was getting the thing that he wanted. And I think for her, she wants, that the perception is really part of that. And then what's that?
No, go ahead. I'm excited about what you're saying.
And then, yeah, I mean, and I also just am consistently as a writer in my plays and all around, I'm just interested in people's inability to see other people clearly because of all of our filters that exist that change reality for us consistently, and how hard it is to really just have clear seeing about another human being. And so, yeah, she can't see Vladimir clearly. And that's kind of the, her cloudiness of vision, I felt like was something I was interested in exploring in the book.
Well, I felt at times, and again, it's fun. It's sort of a fun puzzle to have this conversation without any spoilers. But I felt that there was this tension in the book that I've written about myself, this problem of female desire that is exactly what you just said, where she's desiring something, but she wants to be the object.
Right.
Her desire to turn her into an object somehow. And that's why her vanity is such an important theme in the book, and so poignant and funny and human. It's just beautiful.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. And that's a great way to put it. It's like she wants to be she wants to have the desire, but the desire is for herself to be the thing that is desired. Yeah, absolutely.
And yet her feminism that is of her moment that you were describing earlier is a feminism that's more on the page of, well, we'll get what the men have, right? Like
right.
We'll sort of take the goodies that they've been getting. And so that's a different kind of desire than she sort of naturally feels, but she exerts it anyway.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, which is, she's at odds with herself, it seemed to me, which I loved.
Yeah, I think she absolutely is. I think she's trying to figure it out. Yeah, I think she's attempting to figure out how she can continue to want things and where her want should exist. That's in a way, her project of the book is how do I relate to desire at this point in my life? And I've been so, I mean, as you say with the vanity, like she's been taught to view herself in a certain way and to view her body in a certain way and all of those things in a certain way. And that all impedes a kind of natural desire, straightforward desire of like, I want this thing, I want this cookie,
Right. Yeah. How, was it was it a challenge to write? Like when writing a woman who's older than you, was it an intense limitation of things that you've observed in yourself, or like what was that like taking on that persona?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like it was a mix of, I feel like when like all writers write like observational and then fears about yourself, a letter of fear about about your future and what you're going to have to be forced to make do with, as you get older.
Yeah, so maybe there's some energy that comes from the fact that this isn't the experience you're having now. It's something you're looking forward at. So your fear animating some of the plot of the book. I'm going to open up to questions in a moment. So do feel free to put those in the Q&A, audience people. But I have a sort of eccentric little question that's been kind of nagging at me. There's this line in the book where the narrator says about working in academia, I didn't want to be in the world around all those people who didn't read books, right? And yet, like all the books that she loves are no longer okay to read. And I was sort of curious about the role literature itself plays in this book. Is there a way that the younger characters are eschewing some central experience of reading, or does that speak to any of the themes you're touching on here?
Yeah, I mean, I think she's she kind of puts down quite a lot. Her I think at one point she says, I studied, women's literature, which is not as basic as it sounds now. I think, yeah, I mean, and I think it speaks to something we were talking about earlier, which is the sense that the world is shifting underneath her, that she has made her life, made her castle, made her refuge out of all these works of literature. They've taught her how to perceive. They've taught her about what it means to be a human, how to interpret interactions, how to know when something weird happens in a room, what's maybe going on with people. Yeah. And so they've been her teachers, her profession, her refuge. And I think, and then she feels like potentially she has to be apologizing for them or sweeping them under the rug, or, in some way, that the things that she has loved, she's no longer potentially allowed to love, and more that it's not even like she's not allowed to love them, because I think she's smarter than that. I think she just doesn't know how to teach them. She's struggling to figure out how, or she wants to share that love, right? And she doesn't know how to share that love anymore, because now the questions that are being asked about it are so different than the ones she was at, than the ones that she's interested in, that she's asking.
Right. And in a way that's really interesting. Like when we're engaging with works of literature or any work of art and we want to teach it or somehow work with it, you teach that love by the fact that it's the canon. And then when it's no longer, that's being questioned, it sort of throws into it becomes, the teaching of it becomes problematic. And that's really interesting. Like, as it's great, it no longer becomes an acceptable answer.
Yeah. And I think she's also just so interested in, and the book is interested in form. It is interested in form and in themes and imagery and all of these things that I feel like she thinks, or she senses are not the way that we're looking at things anymore. I think about that very famous poem, Fuck Your Form, as an example of that. And how there's absolutely a valid point with that poem. And then it's also, what do you do when you've built a life out of forms,
Right. And how does the next thing not become its own form?
Exactly.
There's that. sit here and talk to you for another hour, but I'm going to open this up to questions, and I'll just read them to you. This is interesting. Do you like your narrator? And what are the redeeming qualities?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not my job necessarily to like her or dislike her. I think that she, I wanted to explore her, and certainly there are moments where she has charisma, and there are moments when she does things that are questionable. But in a way, I try to keep any sort of affection away. Or any sort of opinion about her away, because otherwise I couldn't really write her very truthfully, felt like.
Yeah. And they asked, what do you think are her redeeming qualities, which is an interesting way to think about her.
Yeah, I don't know if she needs redemption.
Yeah. It's kind of an anti-redemption novel. Okay, somebody asked about vanity, which we sort of touched on, so I'll come back to that. This person says, I'm curious which previous academically oriented novels you have considered influential, and they wondered about Francine Proza's Blue Angel.
I don't know that book, but I have heard it referenced. I just actually heard it referenced in relationship to Vladimir today. But I'm interested in checking it out. In terms, it's funny because I published the book and then everyone was saying to me, you've written the campus novel. And I actually was like, oh, I don't know what that is. I'm not sure what that is. I think I've read novels set on campuses like Penin. And then certainly there's some more novels, but I haven't ever thought about it as a genre. I'm remembering some other, I think The Wonder Boys, right? Is that a campus novel in a way?
I've never read it.
Okay. I think he's a professor. I mean, I've certainly read a lot about books about professors. I think there was a Richard Russo book I'm remembering. What's that?
Oh, nothing. Go on. But nothing that was an intense direct influence on
in terms of the academic exploration, nothing that was an intense influence. No. Yeah.
Gotcha. Here's a nice one. You dazzled me with your words. Me too. Why is your narrator unnamed?
Oh, yeah. Well, I wanted us to not look at her in the way that we look at, Vladimir as the subject. I wanted us to feel like we were inside her and her thoughts. And I don't have a name for her as of now. There's no secret name that exists that I'm not sharing with the world. She is somebody who I think we just needed to be inside of her mind and her body and her kind of flesh. And I felt like a name would start to create some form that we were seeing her outside there, but we needed to be inside of her. And so that's why I felt like it was important to not name her. And also I got very far into the novel before realizing that I hadn't given her a name. And so I thought, well, that seems like a sign. I'll just continue with that.
This is interesting. Can you speak to the topic of the narrator needing her space when she expresses reasons why she gave her husband the freedom to go to other women for his constant relationship needs?
Yeah, I mean, I think for her, I think that having a career, having a child, wanting to write outside of the career, because she publishes 2 novels, especially around the time when her husband is having affairs, made her crave solitude. I mean, I think because she is a writer, she craves a certain amount of solitude and freedom of thought and freedom from being examined. And I in my mind, I felt as though that that was a way that she could achieve that. And so that she could have that space to create, to think, to be in her head, that she is so important to her.
And yet now, I mean, it seems like now at this point in the book, this is me now, there is some kind of collapse happening with her role as a writer and her vanity.
Mm-hmm.
Her writing seems to be something she's less inhabiting and is more something she's dreaming of performing to the world, or feeling competitive about, or am I getting that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think she, in many ways throughout the book, is trying to build up a different suits of armor. And I think in some way, I think the writing is a way that she feels like she can build up this suit of armor now that she's been kind of publicly exposed. She feels publicly exposed for John's indiscretions, and also feels like her star is potentially fading. I don't think about her as always having a relationship of vanity to her writing. I think that in this, I think we're all so mercurial as human beings. And and we go through phases. We can think we're one way, but really we're one way for 6 months, and then we're another way for 6 months. And then sometimes we're really into our bodies, and sometimes we're really into, being studious in our minds. And so I think that this point in time that we're catching her, I think she views writing as a form of, insulation.
Yeah.
From everything.
Someone asks, at one point the narrator states that morality in art was what happened when art was what happened when the church or the state got involved. Can you talk about the role of morality in the book, not just for the narrator, but for the reader as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think the morality comes from the reader's interpretation of what the book is. I think for me, when I think about a piece of literature and I think about any kind of influence it's had on me as a moral person, that to me is about the space between the book and myself, not about the book itself. So in a way, the book is not, to say that I think I side potentially with my narrator in that moment where I say the book is not moral. What's moral is what your reaction to it may be. And it may be, repugnance for this person. It's not meant to be agreed with. It's not advocacy.
Right. Which is a hard, there's a functionality to the way reading is done now that is looking for a novel to be polemical or to make a point. And it's hard to, I really appreciate how this book not just doesn't do that, but pushes back against that idea. In fact, I think. I'm wondering if you could talk just a little bit about shame. We've talked about exposure, or terrible word, cancellation. But really, those things are just about this imminent feeling of shame we're all going around with while we're waiting to be exposed. And I was wondering if you could talk about that sort of emotional tenor of our moment, if you've thought about it at all.
Yeah. I mean, I think that well, I think for all time, shame has been a powerful emotion that can stop us in our tracks, or can make us, stand still in the grocery store and just like can wash over us in this way of feeling feeling caught, or feeling exposed, or feeling like you shouldn't have done something, or some, looking back on some situation and viewing it differently. So I think it's a thrum of emotional life. And I think the thing that is exacerbated now is that we're in a constant feedback loop about how we're doing. How am I doing? And especially if you're on social media, but even if you're not on social media, texts and emails, and a kind of constant sense of being interacted with, or it's a constant calibration of how am I doing? And I think that question that we're asking ourselves all the time, or are kind of forced to ask about ourselves all the time, is something that can really pick at a very deep sense of just fundamental human embarrassment that we are whether it be we're frauds, or we've done terrible things, or we were fools, or whatever way. I think it's we're just in this loop of of getting responses to feel bad about consistently.
Yeah, I mean, and when I was reading the book, it was weirdly reminding me of Knausgaard. It was reminding me of my struggle, like this 6 volume or however many volumes, like in self-poking, interrogation of one's own shame. And that's a lot of what your narrator is doing, is like, what's her level of exposure? How ashamed is she? Should she be ashamed for him? Her relationship with her shame is really important. Which I appreciated getting that from a female point of view. This is a more simple question. Did you choose that cover? Well said.
I was given one cover, and I wrote back the next day that I loved it. So that is, I wasn't given a spread of covers, but I think the cover very much, and I'll just hold it up again. I think the cover very much is a very witty interplay with the book.
I think it also does something really interesting, which is, we're talking about all these ideas and all these, the intellectual aspect of the book and the way that it's ultra literary and bookish, and thoughtful and full of these really important themes, but it's also a very fun read. And I feel like the cover is a play on that. It's sort of like the cover of a romance novel, and it's the irony is so light step. It's very well done level of irony. I thought I loved it.
Thank you.
Let's see. Let's just maybe make room for like one more question, 2 more questions. Somebody says, you mentioned how the Aristotelian plot structure is quite male. How do you think the plot and the characters' development deviate from that structure?
Well, I'm not sure. I'd have to think about that one, I think, a little more. I mean, I think, the way it deviates is the way anything deviates, I guess, is insofar as it's specific and nuanced to her. And so she's bringing in all of her female socialization on top of that structure, or maybe attempting to, well, I think the reason things go so terribly wrong for her is that she's attempting to shove herself into that structure, but it doesn't quite fit. I think that's maybe a way to think about it.
She's attempting to shove herself into that narrative structure.
Yeah, but it doesn't really fit. She can't make it, for her because of that thing we talked about. She wants to get something, but the thing that she wants to get is more complicated, because she wants to be the object, that is wanted.
Right. I love that because it also kind of gets at the tragedy of living your life according to books.
Yeah.
Which is, one of this character's many, many problems. Well, I think that is a great place to end. We're sort of at the end of our time. And I just wanted to thank you so much for talking with me. And I just loved the book. I will tell everyone, I came to this book because I was having dinner with Maria Semple, and she produced it out of her bag and said a couple months ago, you must read this. And she was like marching around, pressing it on people. And that is how you feel when you read this book. You just want to give it to the next guy. So thank you so much for writing it. I just loved it.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Books and Books, for having us tonight.
Thank you both so much for being with us tonight. And congratulations. Happy book birthday.
Yes.
I mean, what a remarkable day this has been, right? Thank you so much to everyone watching. Reminder, you can order the book right here tonight. We'll ship it right out to you. And if not, you can pick it up. If you're in Miami, you can get it at any one of our stores. And thank you so much for joining us. Wonderful conversation. Really, really appreciate it. So, okay, then good night, everyone.
Good night.